Thanks, Amy. Yeah, and so glad to see all of you. We're happy to have you here at our monthly brown bag. Today, our guest is Yvonne Hutchison. She's an occupational therapist with Infant and Toddler Connection of Fairfax County Falls Church. Yvonne has had over 20 years of experience working in pediatrics. She is certified as an early intervention provider and has advanced training in sensory integration. She's provided occupational therapy in private practice as well as in school and early childhood settings. And one of her areas of specialty is related to understanding how sensory processing impacts children of all ages and affects their functioning in various environments. So when working with children in any setting, she emphasizes and prioritizes close collaboration relationships with teachers and families as they are the experts on the children they're caring for. With strong collaboration, she believes a structure of supports and interventions can be implemented that are not intrusive, but cohesive with the classroom or home environment. So today we're going to be talking about the sensory integration needs of young children. Touching, tasting, smelling, listening, looking, and moving are all ways young children learn about themselves, about their environment. The sensory system is the foundation for higher learning. It has a role in problem solving and social emotional development. With some deeper understanding and investigation, we're going to explore how the sensory system also contributes to behaviors and actions of young children in group situations. This presentation will explore the basics of sensory integration, what it looks like in early learning environments. The questions we're going to explore today are how do we provide the just right amount and type of sensory input to optimize learning? And also, how do we know the difference between a sensory need and a behavioral concern? So again, so excited to have you all join us here today. And we're all really looking forward to today's discussion.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you all for joining this talk. I want to first appreciate all of you for being here and appreciate you as early childhood educators. You have such a special gift. So thank you for investing in our young children. It is such a beautiful thing to have conversations with all of you. It's one of my favorite parts of doing what I do. I'm going to go ahead and present, and Amy will be monitoring the chat. We're not going to address questions right off the bat, but if we have time, we'll look at them later. But if there is an opportunity to add to some chat if you want to, when I ask some questions, or feel free to chime in. So here, let me go into presentation mode. Okay, and I will not be able to see myself, so just bear with me. Okay. Slideshow from the beginning. So here we are, sensory needs of young children. Let's get right to it. We'll start with the basics and dive deeper as we gain a richer understanding of the sensory systems. Let me see which tool here works best for changing my slides. Okay, so we all know the basic 5: sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. In addition to those 5 senses, there are 2 more very important senses that children use when exploring their world, and you can see those on the slide: the proprioception and vestibular sense. More recently, you can see at the bottom there, that last dot, more recently discussed was the sense of interoception. We're not going to go into that much today, but it is certainly important in the sensory picture of some children, and that has to do with the internal sensors. And it's important in younger children because oftentimes we're seeing kids with potty training or not recognizing feelings of hunger or thirst.
Yvonne, yes. I think that we can't see the slides progress. What I can do is, if you want to get out of presentation mode, I can try to put it up on my screen and you can go from there.
Okay, so you only see the first screen?
Yeah.
Okay, let's stop sharing.
Okay, so let me get it set up. Sorry for the delay, 1 second. Oh, sorry. I, of course, had it, and then I had accidentally closed out of it. Okay, so let me see if this works any better.
Okay.
Let me know. Let me get it set up here. Okay. Can you see
Sorry
this
about that, folks.
deck? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Can you see this?
Yep. And I can just go ahead and tell you when to move to the next slide. That's no problem.
Perfect.
All right. So that was the first slide that we reviewed. The 5 main senses, and then the 2 additional senses that maybe you weren't aware of, or maybe you were, and then that last sense of interoception. Let's see. You can go to slide 3. The best way to think of proprioception and the vestibular senses is to think of it as how your body moves. So proprioception tells you how you're moving your body in space. For example, when you're walking upstairs, you don't have to think about where your foot goes. You're just progressing to the next step. Next slide. The vestibular sense, it tells you where you're moving. Am I upside down? Am I swinging? Am I going backwards or in circles? Am I dizzy? Should I stop moving? These are all very important senses for helping children understand what their bodies are doing. While the first 5 senses are the most obvious to change a sensory experience when you're in an early childhood classroom or environment, the proprioceptive and vestibular senses have a very big positive impact on helping children with overall regulation. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few tips along the way to put into your sensory toolbox. So this is the first one. Provide opportunities for children to move throughout the day in different ways, such as climbing, on, under, over, dancing, pushing, pulling, swinging, sliding, hopping, tumbling, bear crawling, and so on. Some of you may have seen the latest on YouTube's or other Facebook posts of like the sensory walk. Now those look a little complicated, but you can use some of those little items inside your classroom. So think about this. Why, with all the pressure to teach letters, numbers earlier and earlier, is it important to pay attention to the sensory environment, the classroom, the hallways, outdoor, indoor play spaces, as well as the child's own sensory system needs? Well, the message throughout this conversation is going to be about children learning through their senses. Think about it. They're always touching, smelling, listening, looking, moving in order to figure things out. So higher level cognitive skills are built from a sensory foundation. Amy's going to go to the next slide and give you a visual of this. I love this slide because I think for me, it just helps map out the progression. The first layer in a building is putting down the foundation. We need to help these children build a strong foundation. Only then you can see, will they be set up for success? And that's the key to move to the next level. The next level you can see body scheme, balance, bilateral coordination, motor planning, posture, all of those things that you see kids doing when they're moving their bodies. All of the things we want them to do to begin to learn higher level concepts. We need them to sit in their chair without falling out of their chair. We need them to be able to use 2 hands together. We need them to be able to understand the right and the left sides of their bodies. Now, yes, there's times where those skills are developmentally appropriate and should come into play, but we have to build the foundation. We have to set them up for success. So you can see, after we get an idea of how our body works in relation to our environment, then you see the early learning development, words, putting short sentences together, pre-writing skills, that visual motor and visual spatial, scribbling, snipping with scissors, painting, concepts of size, shape, completing puzzles, shape sorting. And then finally, do we get to those higher level concepts, problem solving, reading, writing, and math. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. So let's look at the official definition of sensory processing. Sensory processing refers to how children receive and respond. And I highlighted those 2. I made them bold for a particular reason, and we're going to find out as we move on. but it's how they receive and respond to information from the environment using their senses. And those are the senses that we talked about early on. You'll see at the end of this presentation, I've given you lots of websites with research-based information on sensory processing. Okay, so receive and respond. Think about that. That's 2 ways in which sensory information can disrupt a child's participation in a routine activity. We're talking every day. We're talking what they do every day. How is this becoming a challenge for people, for little people? Okay, so here's your tip number 2 for your sensory toolbox. Sensory experiences are all day, all the time activities. Let's break that down. Let's go to the next slide. All right, everyday activities, eating, playing with others, music time, books, potty use, changing from busy to quiet, inside, outside play, dressing. I'm pretty sure lots of these things are happening in the environment that you are instructing these little people. I can imagine lots of these things are part of your day. So let's break down some of the sensory input of these everyday activities. I'm just going to choose a few. Eating, well, we all do that, and we do that multiple times a day. So let's take a look at that one. Just think of all the tastes, texture children are experiencing in their mouths. We as adults take that for granted. Let's do a little visualization. Close your eyes. Think about what makes your brain send happy signals when you taste that delicious dessert or that juicy piece of steak or those perfectly cooked vegetables. Okay? As adults, you're visually enjoying it. You probably smell it. When you finally get to taste it, you feel satisfaction. Okay. So that's our experience as an adult. Now remember, as adults, we often use our experiences to explain little people's experiences. But I want to just caution you on that and sort of take a step back. We're going to do a little perspective shift as we go through this presentation. So let's think about it from a little person. And we're going to do that throughout this presentation. Children learn a lot about their food by touching it with their hands, squeezing it. I mean, we don't usually go to a fancy restaurant and like dig in with our hands, right? We've kind of already developed our senses to enjoy the socially appropriate ones. But that's important for them. They need to squeeze it between their fingers. They need to rub it in their hair. They need to try to get a spoon to their mouth and succeed or fail and succeed and fail again. That's that coordination that's happening. That's laying a sensory foundation. Visually inspecting it. How many kids will right off the bat look at food? They might reject it just by what it looks like. Maybe it's not the right color. Maybe it's not the right shape. There's so many sensory components to eating. I'm going to let you know that when you see children who have challenges with eating, it's not an easy task to tackle, but it is doable. And throughout this presentation, you're also going to learn how to become what I would consider more of a sensory detective. You really have to sort of break things down to the small pieces. And so feeding actually fits into that very easily because you can break down food, not necessarily as in you're cooking it, by the sensory components. What does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it feel like in your mouth and in your hands? Some children can smell the food coming from a distance. They smell it when it comes up near. They might just reject it based on the smell. How many of you have heard somebody say, "Oh, I feed them so they don't get messy"? To me, that gives me a moment of pause because I want to think about what are those children missing by not having that messy experience? Now, I don't expect, all out throw food and all that sort of thing. That would be terrible to manage on a day-to-day basis. But possibly there are some times where you can explore food. And this is what I love about early childhood environments. I love seeing when they do that wonderful activity of moving from seed to plant, or a pumpkin life chain where you have the seed, and then eventually they open up the pumpkins and they get to feel that messiness. Now, that's not for every child and that's not for every adult, but that's the experience that we're talking about. And then in the end, maybe they try a pumpkin pie. That's pretty amazing. All right, so these are all daily activities. Let me think of another one. Oh, how about the book time? Everybody, I'm sure everybody does book time. Anybody want to chime in on the chat about some of the things, the sensory components of book time? Amy, if anybody sends something, you can just shout it out for me. Otherwise, I'll just go ahead and move forward. Sensory components of book time.
How heavy the book is when you hold it, when you pick it up.
Oh, I love that.
And being able to manipulate the pages to turn them.
Mm-hmm.
Smell, touch.
Yeah. We don't just read them, do we? We touch them. Yeah, we feel them. Some of them have noises. Some have lots of pictures on the page. So again, the visual sense. Some have few pictures. We can read them loudly when to our children, or we can read them quietly, or we can adjust throughout. Or we can just sit and listen. Music time is another aspect of your day, I'm sure. We can sit and listen to it, or we can get up and dance. We can wiggle uncontrollably, follow the leader, stomp hard, use your tippy toes, twirl, fall down to the ground. Again, think of the sensory components that that child is feeling and experiencing in that activity. It could be a lot of sensory information. It could be a little sensory information. I think it's great to know that we all can help children learn through the routines and activities that you just do every day. That's sort of the basis of this talk, figuring out what is challenging, but not necessarily having to make great changes, because we're all super busy. And I know I've been in those classrooms, I've been in those daycare environments, I've been in early learning environments. I know that there's a lot going on, not just from the childcare perspective. There's items you have to meet on a checklist. There's parents that you're talking to. There's observers. There's interventionists coming into the classroom. It's a lot. So let's just think about it as this. Let's think about no major changes, just possibly a slight perspective shift. Okay. We're going to talk about some things that you can say, I'm not going to necessarily give up my beliefs in this area, but I'm just going to add a little piece of my sensory knowledge to it to see if we can, again, what I was talking about, dig a little deeper. So those are the basics. Now, what about those kids that are a puzzle to us? And I'm not just saying you. They're a puzzle to me too. After 20 years, I can still see something new that might surprise me, or I have to dig a little deeper to find out about. I think maybe many of you are listening to this talk because you've noticed that there are children who adapt easier to sensory activities and some children who struggle more than their peers. So as we move on, let's talk about some signs that a child might be having some sensory processing challenges. Now, these signs can be behavioral and physiological responses that you might observe. And you're observing them because the children are having difficulty handling, remember those words before, receiving and responding. So that's their adaptive response to the sensory information that they're getting from their environment. Okay, so thanks for that slide, sensory processing difficulties at a glance. Before I jump into these, I want to give you tip number 3 for your sensory toolbox. Behaviors provide clues to understanding children's unspoken abilities to enjoy or simply try to cope with their world. Okay, I know behavior is a big word, and we're going to dive a little bit more deeper into that as time goes on. So let's take a look at this slide, sensory processing difficulties at a glance. In this slide, I purposely used common language to describe what you might see. You can find all the clinical language on the websites that I've provided. So those words might be things like hyper-responsive, hypo-responsive, sensory seeker, or sensory avoider. So those are some of the big words, but they're not necessarily at this moment. Let's take a look at some of these sensory processing challenges. You might see a child who avoids group activities, frequently fearful or anxious of doing something, strongly prefers an adult to children play. They might look clumsy all the time, difficulty with transitions, easily frustrated or upset, maybe for what you think is maybe no reason at all. They don't like to be cuddled or touched or tickled, which I know we don't typically tickle, but it's out there. Parents do that. Touching, they might touch others or invade their space, touching others as in like, oh, you're just too close to little Johnny over there. Or, let's not share a chair. Let's get our own chair. Consistently avoids art and crafts activities, cries a lot, or complains of being tired. Sounds like a little bit of avoidance going on there. So when behaviors happen before a regular routine activity, this is when I think I have lots of early childhood instructors say to me, we do this every day. I don't understand what's going on. Well, transitions are always a big one. So let's unpack that a little bit. When you think about transitions, sometimes it's common to the thing that you're transitioning to. Sometimes it's new. So the activity may be unfamiliar to them. They might seem very upset or frustrated. Why is this happening? This may occur because they're attending to too much sensory information at one time. Sometimes children can't block out additional sensory information. Sometimes they're just flooded. All of their sensory systems are flooded at one time. They don't know what to pay attention to. And this is when we as adults are like, well, you're supposed to pay attention to my direction, to my voice. Let's think of a quick example. We might say, go sit down in your chair. All right, well, that seems pretty simple, but what could be going on? Little person may be hearing a fire engine pass. At the same time, he might be getting bumped into by the group members who are already transitioning to the next step. He might be watching what they're doing to see if he can get some clues as to what he should be doing. His nose might be running. The lights might just seem a little too bright today. And he's being touched or guided, right, to sit down in his chair by an adult. But he's not attending to the action of, I'm supposed to be sitting down in my chair, and he misses his seat. He falls to the floor. And now what happens? You have a meltdown. I think some of you may have seen a situation like this before. Also with transitions, maybe they're just not ready to move on to the next situation. Now, you could say, yeah, lots of kids feel this way, even children who don't have sensory processing issues. And that is true. So sometimes we just need to tune in to that little person. But in particular, children who might have some sensory processing issues, this might be more difficult. And there might be clues to what will help them with this transition. They may need more time to keep their coat on. Lots of times we're in a rush, hang up your stuff, put it in your cubby, give it to your mom. But maybe just having a coat on gives them a sense of security. They might need to be told in advance what's going to happen once they enter the room. So maybe just the fear of going into an environment that is already happening, a challenge for them. Especially maybe if the activities have already started, they've gone into the next mode of what is supposed to happen during the day. They may need an object to carry to the next situation. And I think some of you have utilized this strategy, or perhaps maybe they need an action. Maybe it's not a comfort cuddle item that they need to carry, but maybe it needs to be an action such as jumping or marching or tippy toe walking to the next station that they're supposed to be working at or to the next room. Okay, we could spend days on thinking of all kinds of examples for these. Let me just choose one more here. How about the child who is constantly touching others, hitting or biting? Everything they do is big. Does that sound familiar? Okay, these children often don't like to be touched by other children, or they don't like other children to be too close to them. So they might feel anxious, or they just can't manage all of the group activities. So they're in protective mode, and those hitting or biting or pushing or touching others is their protective response. They may have difficulty with how forcefully they move their bodies. That's why everything looks so big, because that foundation of their body awareness still needs some work. So they're the kids who maybe they're too firm with what they do. The blocks are always banging together, or toys are always knocked off the shelves. The understanding of gentle, while cognitive, they might get it, they physically can't help their bodies do that. Ripping books, irritated by clothing, crashing the hardest. All right, I hope that helps give you some examples and maybe starts giving you a spark in your mind about some of the kids that you're seeing. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. Opposite sides of the coin. I am sure you can think of a child that you care for that may fit into either one of these pictures. We all have different sensory needs, preferences, and difficulties. Some children receive too much information from their senses, like the child in the tent, who might just need a moment, or one toy presented to them, or lower lighting, or a safe space where nobody else is going to bump into them. And others don't receive enough sensory information from their senses. So this little kid he's the little monkey who's always climbing and always moving. Some children need to be approached quietly, using only a few senses. And others need more information from their senses to be able to follow along. Okay, let's take a reflection moment here. I love to reflect. Some of us are better at it than others. Can you think of a sensory preference or a difficulty that you might have? Feel free to speak it out if you feel comfortable, or post it in the chat, or somebody else that you might know. Oftentimes we can recognize it in other people, but maybe not in ourselves. Just take a minute to think about that. Do you have a sensory preference or a difficulty? And don't worry, I'll share one of mine, so you don't have to be the only person.
All right, so we have some sound aversion to chewing, quiet moments.
I like quiet moments, yes. Loud noises like fireworks, right. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. Okay, so I will give you my experience. I can be in a room, a large auditorium, over 100 people, and I can hear a pen clicking or gum smacking on the other side of the room. No, every single time. All right, so let's think about this as an adult. Well, what's the problem with that? People have their behaviors. People do things to keep themselves, by the way, that's probably their own way of regulating their sensory system or staying alert, as we might say. Well, because I'm sensitive to that, I can't concentrate on what the speaker is saying, because all I can hear is click, 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 or smacking, smacking, smacking of the gum. I can't tune it out. I don't know. I just can't tune it out. And that impacts my learning. Okay, I can't focus on what the speaker is saying. So as adults, we can easily change our environments. For children, they rely on adults. They rely on you to recognize the problem and assist them in making changes or adapt the activity for them. Okay, let's move to the next slide. All right. This is where your detective skills come into play. Is it sensory? Is it behavior? What approach can I start with that best connects with the child in that moment to support him? Because he does not have the resources to do it on his own right now. When you see a behavior that maybe is an unwanted behavior, I don't typically name, oops, I'm sorry about that. I don't typically label them negative or positive behavior. A behavior is a behavior. Let's consider what these children might be saying if they had words for their behaviors. I know how much I can take in. Please try to understand me. What does that mean? Acknowledge the child's feelings without judgment. They are expressing themselves. Offer but don't force sensory activities on the child. Have alternatives available, maybe a cozy corner. What is it this child is trying to communicate? Stress heightens my sensitivity. This will hold true for anybody. I will place bets on this. Illness, allergies, medication, changes at home, hunger. That's that interoceptive sense, can all have an impact on how a child responds. It also can heighten already established understanding of what their sensory challenges are. So be aware of that too. I need to know what's going on. I need to know what's going to happen next. Predictability and structure, routines, all of the things that you guys are great at, help children understand the organization of their day and help them know what's expected of them. But look beyond a behavior to what might be causing it. Write it down if it's happening at a certain time, a certain activity, if there's other related behaviors. That's the important piece, and that's part of your detective skills. I need to trust you as an adult. Children with sensory processing issues really look to adults to help them interpret their world. Be consistent with your expectations. Don't force. We already talked about that. Find ways the child can be successful within his or her comfort level. We always need to set appropriate limits, always attend to safety. But collaborate with your team. This is another important piece to this idea of trust and looking to an adult. Who's that safe person in that child's world? It might not be a person that's always in the classroom, but who does that child connect with? That's an important person to sort of identify when that child is having a hard time and maybe you're not available to assist in that moment. I like to be successful, even if I need a little bit of help. Celebrate the process of their effort. Select those child appropriate age level activities. Thank them for what they did do. You know, at this age, it's tricky because sometimes they can notice a little difference of what they're doing and what other kids are doing, but not often, of course. But they still need that positive reinforcement. Thank them for being part of the activity, especially if you've noticed that they've come a long way. Maybe before they wouldn't even sit down at the activity. Maybe now they're sitting down and willing to allow some hand over hand, hand under hand, or even just tolerating the items in front of them. Celebrate what they can do. I like trying it all by myself. Give that child time to try before stepping in. This is another detective skill. Sometimes we don't allow enough wait time to just see. I like to use the term watch and wonder. Sometimes if we give a little bit more wait time, that child might give you a clue as to how they're willing to accept a new sensory experience or what their body needs in order to participate successfully. If you have to intervene or if the child looks to you for extra support, this is a lovely term, connect before you can correct. I see that happen in all kinds of dimensions, right? You can do that with negative things that you see that are unwanted behaviors. You can see that when you're willing to just help a child experience a new sensory event. Build that relationship, build that trusting relationship, because children who have sensory challenges often are uncertain and often put up the defenses very quickly. So if they know, if they see that they can have you as a trusted adult who's not going to force, but is with them in that moment to guide them through the process, you might have little gains. I want to please you. Remind them of what you want, less of what they shouldn't do. I always call these you can statements. The idea of all the time, we always have to put up the no's and you can't and all of those things because we have to look to safety. But let's switch them around. Let's use a you can, especially children who are having challenges. You can do this. You can do that. If you have to say a no, follow it up with what they can do. So then you've just helped that child reframe a situation where they may not have been successful, or they may have gone down a road where it would start looking like a meltdown is coming or something of that sort. Okay. When I was presenting, I had this little, you can see that the spdstar.org at the bottom of my slide. I was going to pull that up, but I think we can wait, just also thinking about time. That's something you all can go to. It's called Do You Know Me? And it's a beautiful illustration from the Star Institute that talks a lot about sensory, but it's from the perspective of a child. So I really like that, and I encourage all of you to check that out. It's a little poster. All right, with all the new sensory information we have talked about, you may have several children. I hope you have some children in your mind that now you're thinking, oh, okay, this might be sensory issues. And remember that last bullet, one behavior does not make it a sensory problem. So that's, again, you are being detectives to sort of list out what is happening in those moments. Okay, we'll talk about ways to help those children that you're thinking about in your mind, and how to make a referral if necessary. But let's look at what you can do now. Okay, let's have some takeaways. How can you practice with all of your young learners? All right, you can, yep, perfect. Next. Tip number 3 for your sensory toolbox. The best way to provide appropriate sensory activities to young children and promote healthy sensory processing is to offer the Just Right Challenge. All right, there's a buzzword for you, Just Right Challenge. Everyone can play the sensory way. Create an environment that allows children to explore activities using their senses in a better way. That Just Right Challenge. Create sensory-rich environments that give the child the ability to interact and learn at their level. And all of you are, I know all of you are really good at grading, what I would call grading or adapting activities. But I think when you have a child who really just throws up those defenses and who are just not willing, this is when that Just Right Challenge might be helpful to you. If a child doesn't want to paint, I know some of you have used these experiences in the past. I see some of my friends on here, so I know we've talked about some of these things, but give them a tool to use instead of a paintbrush. A plastic toy truck can run through the paint. You can make tire marks on paper. If that child does not want to touch that sticky, ooey gooey stuff, let's respect that and help them be successful in a different way. With supervision, of course, they can wear gloves or plastic bags on their hands. And if that's not an option, put it in a baggie. Let them feel how it moves without having the distress of having messy hands. Also, if children have messy hands and you can tell that that's a problem if there's a meltdown happening because their hands are messy. If they're just looking to you like, I really want to wipe my hands, that's appropriate for children at this age. Give them a towel. Help them have control over that. Have a napkin available to them. Remind them, your towel is here if you need to wipe your hands because they're messy. Anything that allows this child, the Just Right Challenge, anything that allows this child to join at a level that he's comfortable with. You're never forcing, you're never taking their hands and putting them in the messy materials. Something that they might perceive as ooey or gooey. You're respecting them and helping to adapt that level. Let's see. Okay. We often outside free play opportunities to run. Oh, those are so much fun. But what about on those days when they have to come inside because it's rainy or too cold or snowy, which we've had a lot of. This is the time to help make little helpers. So this is when you can start using that understanding of the proprioceptive sense to your benefit and to their benefit for better organization of their bodies when you have to move on to the next activity because they're missing that outside time. This is the time to make little helpers out of them. Ask them to help you if you're changing the room around for the day. Now, I know we have things that go in particular places in particular ways, but this might be a chance for you to explore something new with your children and give them a chance to have some say in what their environment looks like or feels like. Let them pull or push baskets. Let them take the baskets off the shelves and rearrange them into different places. Carry a few books from one location to another. You're giving the body a sense of what it feels like to do some heavy work. It's sort of like if you are big exercisers or you like to work out in the garden. Do you know how it feels like after you have a good workout? Or you've just been in the garden all day and you kind of feel the muscles that you haven't felt in a while. I do that all the time when I even just start working out. So I know this experience. It just gives your body a sense of what it's doing and where it is in space. Maybe you can build a tent, have them crawl under, push laundry baskets around. All of these activities provide what we call heavy work for them to use their big muscles like they would do outside if they were running, jumping, showing you how they're climbing, all of those types of things. That's that proprioceptive sense. Okay. Before we move on to the next slide, let me give you tip number 4 for your sensory toolbox. Children with sensory challenges often need a sense of control over something. Right. Okay. Most children have that same sense. I get that. Most children, most adults, we all want to have control over something. But this just right challenge idea allows room for child choice and modifications to the item that you chose, which you don't want to change, but are able to make modifications to that. So that's just a little thought about just right challenge. Okay, slide number 12. And we're coming to the end. Oh, those are just pictures. You can go on to the next one. Creating environment where they can have active alert play. This is another way to help your classroom to adjust the level of energy in the room. You can try simple things. Use your voice as a modulator is a great way to start. Speaking loudly to get their attention, but also speaking quieter. Sometimes children just tune into that little whisper or singing directions. Turn off a few of those fluorescent lights if you can. Try to allow some natural lighting. You know, I don't know if some of you can hear it, but that buzz of those fluorescent lights just sometimes just gets to me after a day in the office. So if it's possible, try that. Walk across the room, move closer to gain attention. Sometimes children just cannot tune out the other noise when somebody is talking to them and there's a few bodies in between them. Let's see, music. Oh, just a little note on music. Children learn a lot from music, and I love to use music in our programs, but they also learn a lot from other children, natural environmental sounds and quietness. So I like that someone mentioned that they like quietness. Try turning off the music for a few periods of the day. If music is a big part of your classroom, give it a try. You might see better attention. You might see more interest in the music when you do turn it back on. I have lots of families who say, yeah, we have the TV on all day, but they're not really paying attention to it. Well, that might be true. They might not be sitting in front of it and watching it. Now, this isn't happening, I'm sure, in your early childhood environments, but at home, the reference I'm making here is that that's still background noise. That's still sound that child is either attending to while trying to attend to an adult talking to them, or they're trying to not attend to it while an adult is trying to talk to them. So think about how music and sound impacts the learning environment. Okay, beanbags, chairs, pillows, tents, comfy, quiet corners. I'm an advocate for that. Finding a play space. I've seen lots of classrooms now who have some of these safe climbing gyms that have like little houses where you can go inside and just sit. I've seen lots of little couches for children. I've seen 3 to 4 little kids squished on that couch, and they're quite happy just sitting there looking at a book together. So some of those things might be helpful. Okay, next slide. And we're going to be close to wrapping up here. So this is just an example of some ideas. Let's review the sensory basics. Encourage but never force participation. Process is more important than product, which I know many of you know. Because children want their art to look like their art, believe it or not. You know, lots of parents might say, oh, it doesn't look so great that little Johnny did that today, but doesn't that give you a idea of like what you can move towards and show progress? I like to see my little people's art the way that they decide to do it. Add heavy work whenever possible. We talked about that being a little helper. Know the importance of your environment. Think about the colors that are in your classroom or in your early learning environment. Think about the distractibility of what it looks like to see lots of words. Maybe there needs to just be picture calendars or picture schedules. Stop and think about why that behavior is happening. And that's what I really want to encourage you when we think about, is it sensory? Is it behavior? You all have a good, strong skill set. I know if you're listening to this talk, you're connected with other talks that have been on here. And they have been so good, especially about the books on self-regulation. I think books are so helpful in sort of just taking it out of the perspective of that individual child. But you're so good about recognizing behaviors. But now I would like to ask you to take that perspective shift just a little bit and consider the sensory components that maybe you're not, that maybe you have control over, that you can adjust for these little people who are learning. Okay, next slide. Some more sensory basics. So what is calming? Slow movement, quiet rooms, rhythmic movement. I've seen some classrooms that have these little swings or hammocks. Thought they were adorable. Heavy work is calming, believe it or not. That's that proprioceptive sense. Deep pressure touch, though, if it's appropriate, those are the bear hugs or sitting with some pillows on their laps, carrying things around, dim the lighting, neutral warmth. Alerting, if a child who just is not really attending, is very slow. Fast movement, louder movement, irregular rhythm changes, squiggles and wiggles, a light touch, bright lights, colder temperatures. Okay, next slide. All right, this is the hot topic. Just wanted to throw this in here. So ADHD, is it ADHD or is it a sensory problem? So sensory problems, sensory behaviors sometimes overlap with symptoms of ADHD. Not sitting still, meltdowns, transition difficulty, especially from a preferred activity. So many kids have a hard time transitioning from a preferred activity, but it's those bigger responses that you're seeing. So my take on this is that it is very important, please hear my words for this, to not diagnose children with ADHD without careful use of interviews and rating scales to get a detailed picture of the behaviors. So they are comorbid. Sometimes you can have ADHD and sensory issues. So that's also a challenge. But remember, children at this age, they are meant to move. Their bodies are built to explore. They need that sensory foundation. Use your detective skills. Please talk to parents. They're great at telling you what they've tried at home. If you're seeing it in the classroom, they're probably seeing it at home. They're a great resource. Okay. Woo! I feel like I've sped through this. I'm so sorry. The next slide. Those are just little pictures. Are resources. The top 3 are some really great sensory resources on sensory processing. So childmind.org, sensory health, and Out of Sync Child. That's author Carol Kranowitz, who wrote this book. She also wrote How to Sync Child Has Fun. She's an educator, but she has a very good, strong foundation in understanding sensory. And then all of the other resources, Healthy Children, 0 to 3 Pathways, CDC. You can find videos on some of those. And please don't forget, we are working with these children in the infant and toddler connection up to age 3. So please give us a call. Please make a referral. We are here for you. We didn't touch on autism because that's a whole nother sensory talk, but they often have sensory behaviors. What I did is include some valuable resources on here about where you can get good information. Please don't use Dr. Google. I think that will be helpful. All right. Woo, Amy, how'd I do?
Perfectly. There's just one question. Are these PowerPoints available to be sent out?
Sure.
Okay. And so I can send that in a following email. I did want to give a chance for folks to ask questions. What I can do is I will ask if there's any questions now and then stop recording. And then if there's any questions after the recording too, depending on comfort level. So while we are still recording, I see one question. It says how to make a referral the best way.
If they are under 3, please call the Infant and Toddler Connection. It can be a self-referral. It can be a referral from the parent themselves. It does not have to come from a doctor, but we are in close collaboration with their pediatricians. They will get a copy of our plan. So if they are under 3 or even close to 30 months, we will still take that referral and support them. If they are over 3, Child Find, many of you know of Child Find. They have therapists on staff. So the school system, oops, do we still call it Child Find? I might have just made up.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm so old school here. And so that's another option. If the parents don't want to go through the school system, you can always locate private providers in the community.
All right. And then any other questions? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.